And we are live. It is Wednesday, June 8th, 2022. It is 5:01 p.m. The Reverend Dr. Hillary Livingston notes that I'm in a dress shirt. It's not really a dress shirt because it's short sleeves, but I am at the Brookings Institution, and where dog shirts are not forbidden, but
they're frowned upon.
well, I was this morning interviewing for the Lawfare podcast one of the most extraordinarily impressive people I have met in a very long time, a woman named Alexandra Matvichuk, who is a Ukrainian war crimes investigator for an NGO that has been investigating Russian war crimes in Ukraine since 2014. She is visiting Washington, trying to advocate for um, uh, uh, an appropriate tribunal to think about war crimes prosecutions. And I was going to go over to the Goat Rodeo Studios to meet with her. And I thought, given that she has never been on In Lieu of Fun, she probably is not as informal as most Americans are. She might take the dog shirt amiss. And so, in a sign of my respect for the work that she does, and the fact that I actually wanted to have a conversation with her about her work rather than my sartorial choices, fascinated though I am by my own sartorial choices, I put on a anodyne white shirt of precisely the type that nobody would ever talk about except the Greek chorus.
Right. So basically, you did not want to be the story. She was the story. That was number one.
And
And
yet,
right.
here we are talking about my shirt again.
Okay. But the second thing is that, like, obviously when you're talking about war crimes, like there's a certain kind of soberness and that you want to bring to the enterprise, to the
Yeah,
discussion. So
you
I get
don't
that.
want like the dog
Yeah.
shirt levity. There are
Yeah. No.
circumstances that you
Yeah.
want dog shirt energy associated with. I'm not sure that talking
Yeah.
about war crimes with somebody who has personally interviewed 100 plus victims of Russian torture, like that's just not a dog shirt
Yeah.
energy kind of situation.
Yeah.
And so
I think what the kids say is that that's not the vibe. Yeah.
it's not the vibe.
Yeah.
So all of that is a long-winded way of saying we are not allowed to have fun anymore. We're also not allowed to have Kate Klonick
Yeah.
anymore because Kate is stuck in a European airport of some sort. Her flight has
She
been delayed.
she told us, she just texted saying that she was going to try to call in from Uber.
She's going to try to call in from an Uber. Well,
Yeah.
that always works really well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I mean, that's like the dog ate my homework of our generation. Is like I tried to call in from an Uber,
Right.
and I couldn't get through.
And as you never really know whether that means I had a better offer than to hang out with you,
Yeah,
or whether it
I think it
means.
pretty clearly means that. I don't think
So,
there's any doubt.
Scott, since the last time you were on In Lieu of Fun, you have been to the Holy Land
I have been.
and
I
back.
yes, that is in fact true. I have been to Jersey City, um, and um, and I'm back. I also went to Tel Aviv, which I know is the first time in 38 years that I've been back to Israel.
So I have a couple preliminary questions.
Sure.
First of all, does Tel Aviv, in your judgment, count as part of the Holy Land? Or
No,
is it
no, no.
really part of the Philistines' territory?
Oh, right. Well, first of all, it's definitely as they say, Eretz Plishtim, right? Definitely the Philistines, the sea people who came over, and the Phoenicians, of which we get phonetic alphabet. I just always want to plug the Phoenicians, because they don't
They
really
don't
get
get
enough.
enough credit.
They don't
I'm
get
very,
enough credit.
because the descendants of the Phoenicians, the Lebanese, and the Carthaginians, uh, they're pretty cool. Seafaring people, great traders, uh, outposts all over the Mediterranean, and they invented phonetic alphabets, which you
Yes.
got to say that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, it's definitely impressive because I mean, I haven't even done that. It is true. Tel Aviv feels to me more like Santa Monica or something. Like Israel kind of also feels like California, like if it were at war with Oregon, Utah, New Mexico. There's palm trees.
But Tel
Very
Aviv is more like Miami Beach.
yeah, you know what? I think that's right. Except that it's much more California in terms of its sensibility. Like the food is a certain way. There's a
Right.
kind of cafe culture. It's a very lively place, and I I though found it physically grueling. It's very hot there, and also I'm a weak American, and I found adjusting to the weather difficult. I lost 10 pounds, which is strange because you should like when you go to a
Gain
place like
weight.
yeah, get
Yeah.
gain weight exactly. And also the food's incredibly good, and I really ate a lot of it. But the beach runs along the city, and then so I did a bunch of things. Ate many things stuffed in pita, which is really an incredibly efficient. Like it's a container that you can eat.
Right.
It's like the original bread bowl, and so I'm a big fan of all that. By the way, I'm sure people. I can show slides.
So
What I did on my Israel trip.
so I have a serious question about this. The last time you were in Israel, you were an Orthodox Jew, and
Yes.
you were there as an actual bona fide yeshiva bocher,
Yeah.
which
Exactly.
is a phrase I don't know how to translate into English. It kind of means a yeshiva, literally means a yeshiva bookworm.
Yeah.
It means a student, but it
Just
has an implication of somebody like Scott Shapiro who's really intellectual and nerdy and who just wants to sit in yeshiva and study ancient texts.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, basically, grad students, as you described it. No, that's right. It's like you just like geek out about things that like legal issues that you feel very passionately
Right.
about. But like so I buy wheat, but you give me barley. Like we used to fight about that in sixth grade on the playground. Because some people took some one person's view, the other person took the other person's view. So there's a lot to that I really love about Jewish culture, and that kind of it's cool, at least in many places, to be a geek and a nerd,
Right.
especially about legal things, is something that I really prize, and there are very few other cultures that would accept somebody like me.
So, okay, so 38 years ago, you are a Shiva Bucher in, I forget which Gutetzion,
Yeah, Gush
eh,
Etzion, yeah, exactly.
in Efrat, if
No, a lunch foot,
I'll let you
a
want to.
lunch
Okay,
foot, yeah,
so these are the inner ring southern settlements off of Jerusalem. They range from very, very mainstream to some of them. Most of the Gush Etzion settlements are pretty
yeah.
mainstream, not especially radical, but they're definitely not within the green line. So you were a settler yeshiva bucher
I mean,
38 years ago.
yeah. I actually
Too
think that
fine a point on it.
well, yeah, no, but I would just say that I believe that a Lone Foot had a carve out such that that area was actually legally acceptable to actually build something there. Because as you're not allowed to build in on occupied territory, which has happened, which has been
Quite a lot.
and accelerated in the last 20 years. But no, it is true. I mean, I was like, you know, I was 18 years old. I went to, I went there not because it was um, where it was geographically, but I went there because that was like the best place to go to learn. At least at the time, it was the most hardcore. So you went, and also I wanted to kind of emphasize that, you know, I was there before the first Intifada, and it felt, like, I feel like you could fool yourself into thinking that, like, people, there wasn't like settlement building, there was, economic cooperation. You didn't have the walling off of Gaza. You didn't have so many things that you have now. But of course, when the first Intifada happened, at least that made a big impression on me because I thought, this is, they're very unhappy about the situation, and I just, that pained me greatly.
So, okay, so you leave, you have not been back in 37 years.
Yeah,
And when you go back not to the settler suburbs of
yeah,
Jerusalem, which are just geographically hilly, breezy, a desert, um, kind of windswept, and ancient. I mean, you any direction you look, you will see ruins, and the ruins can be hundreds of years old or thousands of years old. That's the Jerusalem hills. But you come back to Tel Aviv, which is coastal, super modern,
yeah,
um, uh, like incredibly cosmopolitan, and really Jewish in the modern techno Jew sense of the word Jewish,
yeah.
but not religious at all.
Oh
In
no,
fact,
not yet,
it's
not at all. Right? It's incredibly secular. Um,
and so my question is, like, how many different kinds of whiplash did you have?
well, it got so much of it, and I'll tell you, for example, like, well, I don't have my phone here. Oh, here's my. Um, so, I mean, obviously, like, I hadn't been back for 38 years because I like was extremely unhappy what was happening politically, it's gotten just much worse. And I guess it was, first of all, it was so shocking how walled off, in the sense that you don't experience it, you don't see it. It's like, it's, you don't know that, like, 3 kilometers over, like, there's occupied territory, and it's very, it's to me, I often, like, it will really bother me. But other times, like I found this very moving. I mean, like, and you'd have to be me to find this very moving. Where is it? It's a here. So I don't know if you could see it. There's there's a there's a street sign, and it's Elam Mitziot, which means, you know, like, what are the obligations and the rights of those who find things on the ground to return them to their owner? And it's the first kind of, like, serious tell me the other thing you learned, or I learned when I was in sixth grade, and the fact that a street was named that is it's like for you, Ben, if you were walking, you saw Section 702 Street or something, something like that. But I guess and that like the references around me were all kind of things I had heard growing up. So Bar Kokhba Street,
Right.
Bar Kokhba is like this kind of revolutionary guy in in the 130s, but he's like able, you learn that like he can ride on a horse and pull up a whole tree, by the roots because he was that strong. He was like the one.
And because Jewish kids were so physically incompetent that they would believe that shit.
You're like, holy crap! I could never do that, but this Bar Kokhba day. So like
Yeah.
the fact that like those are the street signs, it spoke to me. Like I can't deny where I come from and who I am, and so that, and yet I don't believe, I don't accept any of that, and in fact, it's not part of my family, and so I in a way touched by things that I no longer accept, and in some cases actively push away against. Anyway, so it was very complex, and then I spoke about cybersecurity, I spoke about war, I spoke about jurisprudence, I spoke about a lot of different things that again had nothing to do with anything that I had done when I was there before, and I was just kind of marveling. I left when I was 19. I was like, 1 year in college, and I was just like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was pre-med, and I thought maybe I'd do engineering, and then maybe philosophy. I had no idea what to do. And then the next time I went to Jerusalem for one day, and I spoke to the Israeli Supreme Court, and that felt really kind of like, wow. It felt that was meaningful too, because I like came back not a total loser.
Well, and the Israeli Supreme Court, just as a physical building, is an awesome building. It's built with a degree of care and thought about law that is very hard to describe, and the court as an institution has a remarkable role, partly because of the people who have served on it, and partly because of the certain weird creatures of Israeli law vis-a-vis jurisdiction and original jurisdiction. It has played a remarkable role in a variety of aspects of the conflict that is unique in the world. I think there's just sort of nothing like it, and is kind of diametrically opposite the U.S. Supreme Court in, it very deeply does not believe in judicial restraint or in, what we think of as what Bickel called the passive virtues just aren't a thing in Israel. And that's highly controversial, but I could see what, walking into that building and to give a speech is, that would be a very moving experience.
Yeah. And also, I was supposed to speak about Joseph Raz. So, he was my teacher, the greatest Israeli legal philosopher, since the founding of the state, and so that was really cool. I was like, that didn't suck. And also a student of mine who I met at Michigan many years ago is now the chief of staff for the president of the court, and so you could as we say, Sheb Nachas, we're very proud
Right.
of your students who've succeeded so dramatically.
All right. So to everybody in the Greek chorus who is now making jokes about either U.S. judicial activism or conservative judicial activism, I just want to say none of you knows what you're talking about. The Israeli Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over everything that you can imagine under the law in Israel. Any challenge to any executive action or legislative action is challengeable as an original matter in the Supreme Court. So imagine that you were a conservative activist uh, and you didn't like something that Joe Biden did, and you didn't have to go to the district court. You could just file a petition that says Joe Biden sucks, and the Supreme Court immediately, has to consider that. That
Yeah.
is Israeli. So the Supreme Court of Israel is two things, and it's actually, it has, the king has two bodies, right? And the Israeli Supreme Court has two separate judicial personas. It is the highest appellate court in the land. It is also the uh, uh, the court of original jurisdiction over challenges to executive action. And so you don't like, that Biden appoints Scott Shapiro to be on the commission for refugees. You can challenge it in the Supreme Court.
Uh,
Um,
do you know?
literally.
Do you know what that? You know how many cases they have per year?
Yeah, it's like
Nine,
10. It's like
nine, nine.
10,000.
Yeah, 9,000.
Yeah,
No,
it's
yeah,
it's a
9.
it's
Crazy.
a crazy system.
One of the things I think is really funny and is that they have 15 justices. But what's really funny about it is that they either meet, like in smaller cases, with 3, and sometimes in 7, but mostly 9. So basically 3 and 9, but never in 15. Why? Why? It's because like it's such a small country that it's like you can never get 15 people like such that like the one of the parties was his nephew or something. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like they would just be conflicted out, or at least, assuming that none of them were Clarence Thomas.
and moreover, they also, to be, I mean, I'm sort of joking and making fun of them, but to be fair to them, they actually take this to its logical consequences. Because if you're an American advocate of judicial restraint, you would say, well, the logical extension of this is that they'll hear cases about ongoing military operations,
Yeah.
and they will.
Right.
They actually do.
Well,
Um,
this was what was so effective at the beginning of COVID. Was precisely because when, like, so first of all, Israel is a very high tech place. It's also a security state. It's also the case that since everyone like is part of the state, like in the sense that they serve for a number of years, like the state already has all their information. That everything is they have the Shin Bet, which is a domestic intelligence agency, and they have all this information. And then basically Shin Bet had all the information about COVID from contact tracing, and then like the intelligence services did not want to play the role of like chasing down like like people who met somebody who had COVID. They just didn't think that that was like a good look for them, and so the Israeli Supreme Court like had to deal with like how like who's allowed to collect this information at the very beginning of this global pandemic where nobody really knows anything. And it's really, and you don't know if contact tracing, how that's going to work. You don't know how this thing is going to develop, and that the Israeli Supreme Court like took that on and worked it out, and they worked it out in a really sophisticated way. It would be great to have somebody on actually one day to talk about like lessons learned from
I
the
mean,
early stages.
so,
But,
so
but 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 yeah, go ahead.
So for people in the Greek chorus who are asking about whether the court is a court of appeals, the answer is yes. In one of its juridical personas, it is the Court of Appeals, the highest appellate court for things like criminal convictions, for certain types of lawsuits. It is also what is called the High Court of Justice, which is a different institution that is simply embodied in the same people. And this is a residue of a British institution during the mandatory period. And so these two institutions are essentially combined. And what we call the Israeli Supreme Court is sometimes sitting as the Supreme Court of Israel and is sometimes sitting as the High Court of Justice. And the High Court of uh, in its juridical persona as the High Court of Justice, it has original jurisdiction over all challenges to executive action. And so it's a wacky institution. It has become an exceedingly powerful and important institution in Israeli life, and as a result of that, it has become an exceedingly controversial institution in a way that is very recognizable to Americans, which is to say that conservatives don't like, or the Israeli right and religious do not like the role that it plays, and the left and secular regard it as a very important bastion. So it's a really complicated institution, and it's a fascinating institution, and it is one of the uh, few institutions in Israeli life, a few government institutions in Israeli life that has really deep influence on other similar institutions elsewhere. The power of its work product is extremely high. And so, for example, you often see citations in the US debate over detention and particularly interrogation to Israeli High Court of Justice opinions or Israeli Supreme Court opinions. Um, it has a real, and there are certain people who have served on it, particularly Aharon Barak and Shamgar, who are just, important figures in sort of international law discussions in a way that is probably not true of any other comparably sized country. Is that fair, Scott?
I would absolutely agree. I mean, what's very interesting is that um, Barak, who was he for 21 years or 28 years? I forget, some like the Chief Justice, the president of the court.
And who coined just to go back to the earlier point about the grandiosity of the Israeli Supreme Court's vision of itself, coined the phrase "everything is justiciable," which I just sort of says it all.
Right. I mean, so he kind of was very much influenced. You see, he wasn't a public lawyer; he was a private lawyer, which is kind of interesting. Before he became the dean of Hebrew University, and then the attorney general, and then moved his way up. But he became a Dworkinian. He was very influenced by Ronald Dworkin, who took a very everything is justiciable view, in part because he was interested in legitimating, I mean, not to reduce what he thought to just the fact that he wanted to legitimate the Warren Court. But if you're like growing up in the 1950s and you lived through Brown versus Board of Education and then the early um, uh, um, civil rights cases, in the 60s, and the opening up of criminal rights of criminal defendants and restraints on the police and all this stuff. You could believe that the court was a really powerful agent of social change, as opposed to what it could be, which is that it's a minoritarian institution designed to stop social change that's broadly popular. And so there's a way in which there's path dependency here. There's a guy who turns out to be really not only an incredibly good lawyer, but he's influenced by people who grew up at a certain time, and it also plays into, like, if you're going to be the president of the court for the next 20 years, you might as well say everything's justiciable, because then you get to say who things are.
Because then you get to justice. So I have I think there's also another quirk of the Israeli Supreme Court that makes it very different from the U.S. Debates, but it's subtle. So the Israeli Supreme Court is entirely a creature of the Knesset. That is, the Knesset is the parliament. There's no constitution that creates the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is created by a basic law of the Knesset that could be changed tomorrow. And so when the Knesset doesn't reconstitute the Supreme Court, it is effectively tolerating the degree of activism that the court is engaged in. Whereas in the United States, the Supreme Court exists by the same grace as the Congress itself. And so Congress actually has no choice. I suppose it could make the court bigger and pack it, but it's a co-equal branch of government. The Supreme Court in Israel is not a co-equal branch of government. And so I think there's a really interesting quality to the right-wing complaints about the Supreme Court in Israel, which is that they hate it, but they also love the pain, right? And they love complaining about it. They've had repeated right-wing governments that are in a position to do something about it. They don't. And there's some sense in which they hate it so much that they don't do anything about it, and they allow it to continue doing, to some degree anyway, what it has done. And so it's almost as though, imagine that the conservative majority over the congressional majority over the period in U.S. history in which Republicans hated the Supreme Court really didn't change it and had the power to. And I think that's a really interesting it's a really interesting component of the Israeli dynamic, is the degree to which the religious and the right hate the court, but prefer having the court to hate than not actually having it.
Yeah, I think I there is something deep within Jewish culture, I believe, that respects authority of a certain sort, that respects decision making on matters of law. That's like, so if you look in the Hebrew Bible, there's the way in which the kind of periods of instability before the appointing of the first Jewish monarch, that is, Saul, and then King David, and then King Solomon.
Judges.
Right. Yeah, right. You have judges, all right?
All played by Sylvester Stallone.
Right. So, like there's just this sense about the power of, the rabbi is the guy you go to when you have the question, like,
but I just want to say, though, that I've always thought of that as just judge is the Hebrew word for warlord.
So
Just saying.
yeah. So obviously, the executive power and the judicial power have always gone together.
Right.
Okay, and that is why we call the court the court. That is, it's a court, right? Because it's connected with the royal court, and so the power to decide, the jurisdiction, the power to say what the law is, and the power to execute it have often been married, and that is why actually we have such a strange attitude in the United States towards courts, in part because initially they were seen as being associated with the royalty, with the king, and they were distrusted, and that's why you have this very strange system where you don't really have federal courts in the Constitution. They just have this, I mean, you do have
You have the power to make them.
power to make them, and then they don't really do anything except for decide state law cases until after the Civil War. And so there's this real ambivalence in the United States towards courts, in part, I think, because they were associated with the king, which is what was, obviously rebelled against. But the phrase that comes up in the Book of Judges also is that there was no one to finally say what the law was in the land. And this was considered to be something very distressing, the kind of sense of anarchy, that there was nobody who could say what the law was. I don't, to me, like I was been drawn to jurisprudence in part because I feel like it's like the study of law and what makes it special and how it works. It feels culturally familiar to me.
All right, so we got a million questions, and I want to start with Dr. Doom's question. What led to Scott's evolution/rebellion from orthodoxy?
Okay, so you want to hear the story?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am sitting, it's 26 years old. I'm sitting in the Butler Library, but the fourth floor we used to be called Bass Library, right? And I was sitting there, and it was 2 p.m. on a Saturday, so it was on Sabbath, and so I wouldn't turn on lights, I wouldn't rip toilet paper, I wouldn't do all the kind of things that you can't do if you're a religious Jew on the Sabbath. Couldn't drive, couldn't use a computer, couldn't it was just, can't turn on the lights, so couldn't cook. And so I was sitting there and I was reading the introduction to Frederick Soupy's The Structure of Scientific Theories, about the deductive nomological model of explanation. The point to simply say that, like, I wasn't doing anything having to do with God or anything like that. I was just like first year graduate student in philosophy. I was reading something that I thought to myself, this is perfect. Like, I'm reading this thing, which is really interesting. This is my job, so to speak, to do that. I'm like sitting in a beautiful setting because.
But there's no malacha associated with
right.
reading
There was, of course, it was also like completely legit what I was doing from a Jewish law perspective, and I'm overlooking. So Bass Library, fourth floor of Butler Hall, overlooked the Columbia campus, and it was a very sunny day. It was very beautiful, and I thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to be doing. And then I realized, holy moly, I've made a terrible mistake. I thought, oh my God, this is the feeling I get from religion. But like, I'm confusing this kind of emotional response to things like abstract thinking or whatever geek nerdery stuff I like doing with the truth. And I had made a mistake. Like I was like, I like what I should be doing is something that like engages me intellectually rather than practicing this thing, which I thought must be correct because when I studied it, it made me feel like this was right. So I just got up and I walked into the bathroom. I was going to rip toilet paper, and that just seemed like such a non-life affirming thing to do. I walked out. I walked home.
So just so that you know, people who don't do Jewish law, ripping paper is specifically forbidden on Shabbat.
Right.
So the urge to get up in response to this, to get up and rip toilet paper, is a is a kind of it's the sort of I got up and ate a bacon cheeseburger
right.
kind
Yeah.
of thing that you can do without leaving the library.
I mean, but it just seemed so. They're like there are rules about everything. So you're not allowed to rip toilet paper, but if you rip it, yeah, at least don't do it on the perforations. No, really. So you're like, so if you have to do, yeah, if you have to, like, for human dignity, right? You rip it not on the perforation. So like there are rules about like everything. And so if you're into that, that's kind of interesting. So then I went home and I'm kind of in a daze and I just go like this. Look, put down the light. And that was it. And I gave it up. I gave
Wow.
Yeah. And it took me like another week to eat pizza out, to be perfectly honest, because that was like it was a taboo thing, to eat pizza out.
And what was the moment that the moment of halachic violation, Jewish law violation, that felt most liberating? Was it the ripping the toilet paper? Was it flipping on the light? Was it eating bacon? What was it?
When I flipped on the light, that like just broke the spell. It was like it just was over, and they're just so like then you have to get over your kind of feelings of disgust so you're kind of you're kind of averse. It's like with COVID, right? So you can say take off your mask, but like COVID's over, but you're not going to just rush out because you already have some inertia over like how you behaved yourself. So it doesn't like all kind of you have that still those kind of feelings of limitation. But I never one thing has not happened to me, and I suppose it could, but I doubt it. Is I've never had doubt about it. Like it just was like that,
It
and I
just
never
turned off.
just turned off.
That's
Just
interesting.
just wild. I guess like certain things like this is just connecting it up with the part of the conversation. That's why the fact that I felt moved by this, street sign or something like that, despite the fact that I don't believe in any of it, it is strange. And it's like feeling both you feel like at home and yet you kind of reject home at the same time. So
All right. Yeah. Well, there's no home like the home you reject. Richard Wattenbarger, the floor is yours. You're invisible for some reason.
I am invisible? Huh.
You're
Wait a minute.
invisible, but deeply audible,
Okay.
and the resonant tones of your voice warm our hearts. Whoop! Now you're not audible either. All right.
Yeah, my heart is going cold.
Yeah, we had but Charles, the floor is yours. You are both audible and visible.
Well, that is kind of somewhat scary, but here we go. So what are you guys' expectations for the January 6th hearings, if anything?
Well, they have promised a whole lot of wild new information that doesn't change our basic understanding of what happened, which if that sounds like, it's basically a whole lot of new detail about what we already know. I assume a lot of that will be really interesting and enriching. I also assume it will persuade nobody who is not already persuaded. And I think they have given a great deal of thought to how to present it, including with a lot of video material from the depositions that they took. Um, uh, I think if you're going to do this prime time, which they are tomorrow, you better have a heck of a story to tell. And I do think the story is an incredible story if you put it all together. So the real question is, how are they planning to put it all together, and how much new there is, and particularly new about the behavior of Donald Trump, I really don't know. So how, they've been releasing a fair bit of stuff as they have discovered it. So how much more there is, I don't really know.
Can I ask you a question, Ben?
Yeah, of course.
Which is like, what's the wildest thing about January 6th that's come out in the last while? Like, for me, it's that, like, Mark Short, that, vice pres- the vice president's chief of staff is worried because the president might harm his boss. That's wild.
So, but that's all in the department of nuance and detail. We knew that there was a crowd chanting "Hang Mike Pence," and that the president was distinctly unworried about that.
Yeah, right, but that's way different than the president's like saying, implying that, like, we may
They're
have to do
fine
something.
to hang
Yeah,
Mike Pence.
yeah, right. I mean, this is
The one thing Trump and the left have in common is a sort of contentment with that as an outcome. Um, um, but I so to me, the most significant set of revelations of the last few months are the Eastman materials, because they show a degree of pre-planning that is really remarkable. And they also show, I think if you combine them with what we know about Georgia, which was that there was a kind of persistent plan operationalized by the president and Mark Meadows to put pressure on Georgia officials to basically fuck the vote, right? Um, and if you put those two together, you really do start to get a like a picture, and this is the picture I think the story they're going to tell, of a plan that begins on November 6th or whatever the date of the, or maybe before, to discredit and overturn the actual electoral count by whatever means is necessary, up to and including violence. And so, to me, the Eastman stuff, partly because the story is so well developed by the combination of the committee's litigation briefs, which are superb, and the judge's work product, which is also excellent. I mean, I wrote when that opinion came out that I think it's the single most damning document in the history of the United States presidency. And no one has brought me another one that was like, well, actually, you forgot this about the first Grover Cleveland administration, right? Like, it's
they
30,
read that one up well. Yeah.
it's 35 pages or something, 42 pages, and it is just, I mean, it's absolutely shocking to read. And I so I think we should assume there are a bunch of good lawyers who are working for this committee, and a bunch of good investigators. And I think we should assume they've done, hundreds and hundreds of depositions, and they've got video of all of them. And so I think you should assume that they've put together a hell of a story to tell. I don't think it's going to be a story that's different from the story that you already know. So
Okay.
that's the best I can do.
You don't think they're going to find coordination between the various rioting groups and people in the White House, for example?
So I think, first of all, if we're going
Sorry to follow up.
if we're going to find that, it's going to be through the Justice Department criminal process. I assume that anybody who had real evidence of that, if dragged before the committee, would take the fifth. And the committee we know they have not immunized anybody. So, if they dragged you up and you were the guy who coordinated, and they'd said, tell us about the coordination, you'd say, I take the fifth. So I think they're actually badly positioned to get some of that, except through electronic data. They have Meadows's stuff, right? They have, so I think you may get, but eventually I think the real evidence of that is going to be in the criminal process. Um, I suspect. That said, it's one of the key things we'll all be watching for is, what do they have on that? The two critical questions we're all going to be sitting around tomorrow night watching for is, what do they have on coordination, fundraising, organization of the event and the White House, right? And violence and the White House or its agents, the Roger Stones, the Steve Bannons and stuff. And secondly, what was the president doing minute by minute during that block of time in which violence was ongoing before he issued the statement that he issued? Those are the two. There's a bunch of other subsidiary questions, but I think those are the two questions that you really this committee is successful to the in exact proportion to its ability to address. Does that give you what you're looking for?
Yep. Yeah, it works.
All right. Richard Wattenbarger. This time, you may end up being visible, and you are certainly audible.
I'm visible.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I can see myself. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I have an international law question. This is for 500 points. So Boris Johnson announced the UK's plan to deport asylum seekers, especially those picked up in the English Channel, to Rwanda. And of course, the UNHCR decried their action as against international law. And I was curious, first of all, if that is in fact the case, or is this in some sort of gray area? And also, are there any mechanisms in place for holding the Johnson government to account, or have the industrialized democracies watched this whole asylum thing so much in the last few years that he can kind of get away with it?
As the person that should know the answer, I will say I don't know the answer. I think if we made Boris Johnson feel shame over his actions, he will change, because he's very susceptible to moral suasion. He's particularly sensitive to being seen as honorable, forthright, with his word is his bond. So we do that.
I will tell you everything I know about this subject, which is not quite enough to answer your question. The position of the British government here, as I understand it, is roughly consonant with the position of the U.S. government with respect to both Cuban and Haitian migrants on the high seas. When we interdict, so when Cuban migrants reach U.S. shores, we give them permanent residency. If we pick them up on the water, we reserve the right to return them, and have returned them in large numbers. It's called the wet foot, dry foot policy. With Haitians, we don't have a wet foot, dry foot policy. We don't admit, uh, uh, and there have been large waves of both Cuban and Haitian migrants across, into South Florida, that we have taken a position pretty similar to Bojo's position here. I think the rule is, if somebody is not on your shores, you do not have an affirmative obligation. At least this is I think, the British and US position. You do not have an affirmative position to grant an asylum hearing to somebody who is not here to claim it. I.e., asylum is not a creature of the high seas. That said, I don't know the specifics of the rule, and once somebody gets here who claims asylum, you have to adjudicate the asylum. That's the situation on the U.S.-Mexican border. But I don't think the U.S. position is substantially different from the British position.
Yeah, I would just say the basic rule about this is that you can't throw them out, but you don't have a duty to accept
Right.
them, and so that's the issue, and so it becomes this, situation where people engage in very unsafe behavior, obviously, because they're trying to get to the shore.
So we have a specialist in this area,
Fantastic.
Jacob, who is being raptured in, and can explain exactly what Scott and I just got wrong. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Oh, hi. So I'm an immigration attorney, immigration criminal defense. No, there was nothing you specifically got wrong. I'm under the impression that you can still get designated as a refugee from abroad, and then come in.
In
There's
fact, you can
also a
only
little
get
bit of
designated as a refugee from abroad.
yeah. It's the difference between refugee abroad and asylee, which is here.
Right.
Just as how the process works out is, people get either processed by ICE at the border or at the border port of entry. There's a whole bunch of ports of entry at the border, but a port of entry can also be an airport. The process of port of entry at the border. Once people express a fear of returning to their home country, they get processed into if it's an asylum claim, as in they haven't been ordered, removed before, or they haven't had an asylum claim denied before. It's a credible fear interview. Yeah, credible fear interview. Where they get sit down with a immigration official or immigration officer, who then will they kind of a non-adversarial interview where they express their fear of returning. As long as it's credible, then they get processed and set up with a notice to appear, and then get referred to a court for a full hearing.
There you go. We always have in the In Lieu of Fun Greek chorus the answer to all questions, even if we cannot answer them ourselves. Itamar, you have a Fitbit shirt. Your hair, you have less hair than the last time I saw you, and the floor is yours.
Minor correction. The last time you saw me, I actually had just gotten the haircut.
Well, I didn't notice.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Scott about his transition from being Hasidic to being secular. I mean, it's like a very tight-knit community. Like, did you lose friends or family over this, or?
Right. So first of all, thanks for the question. I can't believe previous people asked about things like January 6th as if that mattered. I want to talk about me. So the thing is that so among the religious, there's like there's Reform, Judaism, then conservative Judaism, and Orthodox Judaism. So I was an Orthodox Jew, but among those, there were people of different gradations. Now, Hasidim is a form of religious denomination, way of being, and that there are many different groups, and they center around their local rabbi or the town where they were from in Europe, and I was never part of that. I was just like like the guy like now, but I would have the yarmulke on, and I was already in graduate school, and my two of my like mentors in graduate school both were rabbis who gave it up, Sidney Morgenbesser and Isaac Levi. KK.
Hi guys. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. We, you get to hear about me.
Good.
Wait, first of all, are you in a hotel room?
I'm in a hotel room in Germany, and I just discovered that I left my iPad, my computer, and everything in the Brussels airport in the security line.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know what I'm going to do, actually.
That's going to be you're going to have a rough day tomorrow, KK.
Oh,
I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what to do.
Well,
my remarkable, my everything except my phone is impossible.
So
look at the expression on Paula's face right now.
Yeah. So KK, if there's anything we can do to help from here, let us know.
Yeah, and then we won't do it because there's nothing we can do from here. But we can empathize.
Yeah,
That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted.
Empathy vibes and.
Can I just say something? But for the grace of God, it's you, not me.
And thank God for that.
Right. No. I just mean it's like any of us could be in your situation.
I was just like I was like kind of like hustling to get through. I was like, this is really weird. They didn't make me take I was thinking about how I didn't have to show my passport to go through security, and I was like, that was really weird. And then I was kind of just thinking about other stuff, and they had pulled it, and I didn't even notice.
And then you got on the plane, and you were fine without your stuff. And now Kate is frozen. Because that look of shock, I'm going to screenshot it actually, because, there she's, I missed my chance. Paula, we got to wrap up, but you get the last word today.
Do you want me to ask my question or no?
That's why we have you up there, Paul. Yeah, right. Because it would be easy to knock you out. So please, we would love to.
Which one do you want me to ask?
The one that's about me.
They're both about you.
Okay, the one that's really about me.
Okay.
If you ask it, you will really I may cry. And you'll really get the real.
Have you ever cried in your life? No, I'm joking.
Have I ever cried? When my dog died. Well,
now I look bad. Okay, my question is
I cry whenever there's a fucking Hallmark commercial on television. I cry at the drop of a hat.
It's really not surprising that I already cried today, but I was wondering if you've been to other Middle Eastern countries outside of Israel. And if you haven't, if you want to go, and kind of how that, because obviously there's just so much that's the one region of the world where traveling is so much as a political undercurrent because different states don't recognize Israel. So just traveling to them can be difficult.
So I will say I have been to Jordan, I've been to Amman, and I've been to Petra, and so so I've been to Jordan. I was learning Arabic, and my tutor left to go to Morocco, and that was that. But I want to say, just to bring this back to me, so when you go through border control now, if you've ever applied, do you have global entry?
Me?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so I applied like before the pandemic, and they kept on sending me things like global entries approved, conditionally approved, just go for your interview, and like nobody's ever going anywhere again at the time. So I didn't do anything, and so then they make you. They don't make you. They say you can get your interviews. I got an interview. I got approved. But what is really the reason why this loops back to me was that when during the interview they say you have an agricultural violation, and I said I do. Like, I mean, this is. And they said yes. When you came back from Jordan, you were found with grains, and so Paula, I had brought back fricassee, which is a smoked green wheat, and because of that, I am being persecuted by the U.S. government. And so I now do have a TSA pre-check.
We are going to leave it there.
Scott
has confessed his agricultural crime.
Do you want to hear about my driving test?
Not this time, because we're already 6 minutes over, okay. And there's been enough about you on this show, Scott. We are going to leave it there. We will be back on Friday. We'll have a guest then, so that Scott doesn't talk too much about himself, that'll be 46 hours and 53 minutes from now. And until then, Scott.
You can watch this video over and over again. This is on YouTube.
You can.
So you can have, it's like Scott 24/7.
But also, we can't have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, Kate can't have any of her devices.
Oh God! Oh, poor Katie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys.